My name is Kareem Rashwan. I'm Managing Director here at AdvisorStream, and really excited to have a number of people joining us today on our panel from New York Times and Celent, as well as some of us in-house here at AdvisorStream. So I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to introduce everyone before we get started, and just to kind of give you an idea of what's going to happen today and what you'll be hearing is going through a bit of a research report, and then we're going to open up the panel and have some discussions around some digital content marketing strategies for advisors. So with me today is Kevin Mulhern, CEO and co-founder of AdvisorStream. In his role at the helm of a global leader in automated marketing and communications platforms, Kevin drives innovative digital solutions, client engagement, and growth to support AdvisorStream's thousands of financial advisors and a roster of more than 350 broker-dealers and independent networks throughout the US, Canada, and UK. We've also got Will Trout, who is the head of wealth management at Celent, where his research centers on technology, strategy, and innovation in the securities, wealth management, and banking industries. He's got a deep background and valued expertise in automated advice delivery, data analytics and segmentation, and wealth management platform technology. From the New York Times, Aidan McNulty, who's part of the New York Times licensing group. Aidan is the executive director of sales and global marketing for the New York Times licensing group, a division where he previously served as senior editor. Prior to his current role, Aidan worked in the Times marketing division and more recently in advertising, where he managed cross-platform ad programs for both national and New York real estate, international fashion, jewelry, and department stores, including Barney's New York, Gucci, and Tiffany. And last but not least, we have Awad Amir, also from Celent, who is the author of the report that he'll take you through. And Awad is a wealth management analyst based out of Celent's New York office. His primary focus is on emerging technology applications to enhance the client advisor experience. So before we get into the panel discussion, I'll just turn it over to Awad to take us through his research findings for a few minutes and talk about his report. Over to you, Awad.
Thanks a lot, Kareem. So as Kareem stated previously, I'm wealth management analyst working at Celent. Most of my research is normally focused on looking at automation, AI, and machine learning related applications as they apply to the middle and front office experience. But I've been looking a lot into digital content marketing lately, and that's no coincidence. Recent changes in global health have really started to change everything that was assumed previously in the wealth management model. Everything from financial planning to onboarding to client relations, right? So client engagement, in essence, has fundamentally shifted, and it is continually shifting as well. Now that clients have transitioned over completely over to digital channels, you're starting to see them consume more content digitally, right? I think market volatility in combination with the uncertainty driven by the pandemic is causing a lot of investors to, have a knowledge gap that is continually widening. So they're dedicating more and more time to consuming this content. And digital marketers know this, right? They're dedicating more time disseminating all forms of direct marketing at the same time. And so digital content marketing is a tactic that is becoming more and more popular. And that's not to say just recently became popular. It's had a lot of momentum over the last few years, and it's accelerating this year more now than ever before. So before I go forward and talk about DCM, digital content marketing, I kind of want to explain what it means, because it means a lot of different things to different people. At its core, digital content marketing is about education, right? Providing educational value to clients and prospects that they would find interesting and therefore organically share with their network, right? And because your branding and your recognition is associated with that content, you're able to organically promote yourself, right? It's a very subtle, and I believe it's a sophisticated form of marketing. And it's nothing new. I mean, a Fidelity research paper that I discovered states that 64% of advisors are already using digital content marketing as part of their digital marketing strategy. So we go to the next slide here. So I get a lot of questions around, is digital content marketing, is this something that you can do yourself? And the answer is yes. Anyone can define what kind of campaign you want to run, just identify your audience, understand your objective, You have to aggregate and curate the content as long as you're making sure that it's FINRA and IROC compliant, right? You have to determine your campaign, the channels that you're going to utilize, disseminate that, and then obviously measure how well that content's being reciprocated. The problem is this is a multi-step process, right? And it involves multiple tools as well. So, I mean, I highly recommend using a digital content marketing platform to facilitate this. Now, then the question becomes twofold. You have to ask yourself, does your digital content marketing tool cater to this workflow end to end? And really, how much automation is it able to facilitate as you're doing this? Because there's a lot of steps involved here, right? The other area I want to focus on when you are engaging in digital content marketing is the types of content you're going to use. If you go to the next slide here, please. Right, there's this debate around, how do I get more engagement? Do I use free content versus licensed content? And the answer isn't always clear cut. It's really difficult to say that licensed content will almost always do better than free content. It's all about messaging, right? Generally speaking, yes, content that is exclusive, that the public generally hasn't seen, is more likely to be more engaging, right? But content that is public but has been personalized with its messaging will always be more relevant, right? But if you take licensed content and you personalize that messaging, that'll be received better than all forms of other content, generally speaking, throughout my research. Now, if we transition over to the next slide, I want to give our panelists the opportunity to discuss some of the key elements that drive successful DCM, and I want to talk about those elements here before I transition over. The first element is the advisors themselves, their brand, and how they're perceived by their clients and prospects. That also determine how well the content is going to potentially convert or be reciprocated. Secondly, is the content itself, right? How the topicality of it, how relevant it is to your audience. Third, are marketing channels. So how vast is the network you're distributing to? What is the frequency of your distribution? And lastly, is the campaign itself, right? What are the technologies you're using to disseminate this information, the timeliness of your campaign, and the objective and audience of it as well. So I'm going to transition over to our panelists who are going to discuss this as a foundation of our discussion going forward.
All right, thank you so much. No, that's great. It's a great summary of the report, and I think a great introduction, which would help. It's going to help us just kick things off here. So, really just going to turn it over to my first question is to Kevin, and really just want to know, in your view, how does an advisor get started with their marketing efforts and their branding?
Great, thanks, and thanks for everyone for being here today. We're excited about this panel. Yeah, how does an advisor get started? And I think Wad already touched on this a little bit. But basically, an advisor needs to set a goal, right? You've got to figure out what you want to achieve with your content marketing, and then you can put a strategy in place to achieve those goals. You want to know how you're going to position your business, determine what niche you're trying to cater to, and then you're going to determine what channels will help you reach those goals. We'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. So Kareem, is that good?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, on that, Will wanted to get your thoughts as well on that, and how you also see an advisor, how they differentiate themselves from their competitors. If you want to add anything to what Kevin was mentioning just now as well.
It's a great time to point out that actually, in the COVID-19 environment, we've all become more, digitally savvy, right? Even if we occasionally mute ourselves. So, this acceleration of the digital learning curve is great. We've gone, sort of leapfrogged 6 years into the future in terms of digital adoption over 6 months, and clients have too. The downside to that, and to underscore Kevin's point, is that clients are being bombarded by digital content. And so how do you differentiate yourself? I think Awad touched on some of the ways in his report. Clearly the content, it doesn't necessarily have to be unique, but it does have to be relevant to the client. And ideally, it should support an advisor perspective or point of view. So really giving some value add to the client in terms of, how can I as an advisor, what am I looking at? What are the issues of the day, and how can I as an advisor support you, the client?
Right. Yeah. No, I would agree with that 100%. And it kind of speaks to everything that is out there, certainly in the COVID world, and even before that, all the noise, the clutter. So it kind of brings up an interesting point for me around how an advisor can cut through all of that noise and grab a prospect's attention. So yeah, Kevin, if you wanted to take a shot at that as well, and kind of give your opinion on what you think an advisor can do to get through all that clutter.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right. I mean, the only way that an advisor is going to be able to reach out, cut through the noise. I think Awad said 64% of advisors are already using some form of content marketing, digital content marketing. I think what's important is what tools you're using to do that digital content marketing and all those steps that Awad walked us through. The reality is you're going to need to use automation. You're going to need to use AI, and you're going to need to figure out exactly what each client and each prospect is actually focusing on. What are the needs? What are the current problems they're addressing, them and their household? What are their interests right now? What are their focuses? The beautiful thing is that the technologies out there today, the digital marketing and digital content marketing platforms available to financial advisors are incredible. The technology was only available to the largest financial institutions only a few years ago, and today is affordable and attainable and easy to implement and operate for all advisors. And what those tools will do is they'll tell you what each client is focused on, what each prospect is focused on, and you need to use that marketing data to identify what content, educational content, as Awad said, at the center of content marketing is education. So getting the right content in front of each client and each prospect at the right time is going to make you stand out for sure. If you're sending the same content or you're just displaying kind of clickbaity ads on social media, you're delivering the same newsletter to every client, every segment, you're not going to stand out. So we really see results here. We see ROI directly tied to delivering customized content, specific targeted content that's very timely and very credible. And that's another thing. It has to come from a credible source. Of course, advisors write content, their head offices write content, and some of the largest broker dealers in the country that we work with produce a lot of content, but it's still not enough content to be able to send targeted content that addresses exactly what problem or what issue a certain prospect or client is focused on at this very moment. So you really have to get the right content in front of the right client at the right time. To do that, the right content, your head office is going to have to provide you content, and you're going to have to license or find third-party content. It's a long answer, but
no, that's great. I mean, it sounds to me also that what you're really getting at the heart of is what is each individual client value, and how can advisors provide that value. So actually, Will, let me ask you, when you think about value, it has obviously a lot of meanings, and it means something different to everybody. But in your view, what does it mean to a client, and how can an advisor demonstrate it? I mean, even beyond, just one element of their practice, especially in the digital age.
That's a great question, Kareem, and I think a lot of the opportunity here relates to the evolving role of the advisor, right? We mentioned the pandemic and the need to respond to uncertainty in the marketplace, U.S. presidential elections. Clients don't know where to turn or where to get the answers they want. But I mean, on a sort of in terms of secular trends, I would say the ongoing commoditization of portfolio manufacturing and maintenance points to the need for a more strategic approach from the advisor. And that means connecting the dots. What is happening in China, trade wars, tariffs, how does that relate to my portfolio? And so the ability to provide content that illuminates these issues or helps the advisor provide a higher value level of service is critical. And increasingly, as just to recap that point, I mean, it's not necessarily about investments, it's about all sides of the balance sheet. So savings, deposits, insurance needs. And so with that advisor operating at a more strategic level, he can really help his clients.
Yeah, no, great. And I totally agree with you. You know, the one thing I guess on my side, it'd be good to hear just, Kevin, if you have any examples of what, you know, what you feel adds value, what an advisor can do to add value.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to relate to some of what I said earlier, but I mean, first is achieving your strategy and your goals and standing out. I think we've covered a lot of that. But adding value, the word value is thrown around a lot today. So in framing it in kind of marketing terms, I could give you kind of an example, but we see examples all the time. We service thousands of advisors across the country, so we see them servicing different niches. And so an example would be an advisor who services business owners, particular business owners who are in the middle of succession or selling their company. You know, an advisor can very easily today provide excellent white papers, access to certain events and webinars, and articles, again, infographics and videos related to the things that they need to think about as they prepare to sell their business, things their family needs to think about, everyone in the household needs to think about as this business is being prepared to be sold. So if you're providing your client, you're reading the marketing data, you're seeing exactly what this client who's selling his business is reading, you can give additional information that's going to, again, support this solving the problem that he's focused on now and solving the issues that are bound to come up for him and his family after he sells that business. So through content marketing, you can show your client, in that particular case, a business owner, that you're listening, you know what's important to them, and you know the issues that are surrounding this problem that's being addressed, or opportunity even that's being addressed in selling the business. So there you provide value. You're seen as valued because you know what they're going through, and you're giving them educational material, instructional material that literally helps them now. So that's the goal.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. And Awad, last word to you, if you have anything you wanted to add to that or touch on as well on that topic.
So I think it goes back to my initial point that it always just centers around education. And I think value and education share a very positive correlation, right? I mean, in terms of how relevant the content that you're disseminating is and how topical that it is. But in addition to that, how personalized is it to the client's own concerns at the time? So I think that is probably paramount in terms of how advisors are able to show value to their clients. In particular, is staying on top of finding content that would really resonate with their clients. And you know, that's difficult when you have tens of hundreds of clients to manage at the same time. And this is where AI plays a key role in ingesting client data and truly dissecting and understanding what type of content would resonate with them, and aggregating that and then surfacing that to the advisor to disseminate accordingly.
Yeah, yeah, that's great.
If I could add in, just listening to that, thanks Awad, is that's right. Like, the only way today, if you are managing a client base, it doesn't even have to be hundreds of clients, but we see on average advisors managing just over 200 clients. Yeah, how are you actually going to find exactly the right content? How are you going to identify what the topics are that each of these clients are focused on? And that does take AI, machine learning. We you know, different content marketing platforms probably use AI a little bit differently. Consumption profiles will show you exactly which clients are focused on what topics. So it does that segmentation for you, does that identification for you for all of those people. But to Awad's point, you're going to need automation, you're going to need AI to do that. And then the second piece of that, which is often not considered, is where are you going to find all the content? If you've got 200 clients focused on 55 topics, from selling businesses to preparing for retirement to estate planning to gifting, or taxes, the current political environment, as well as just talked about, how are you going to connect those dots for each client? And that does take a large pool of content. That's why we partner with the New York Times and a lot of other the world leading publishers, so that we have access to that content. And so those are really two sides of the same problem, is identifying what content is required to solve immediate problems and to illuminate the dots or connect those dots for each client and each household. And then the second part is, now that you know what's important to them, how do you find that content and find it quickly? That also takes AI. It also takes algorithmic curation and licensing in our case, to make sure that that experience, okay, you've identified the issues, you've found content to help solve those problems or take advantage of those opportunities, you've connected the dots, and then you're going to send content to do that, to illuminate the scenario for each client. But you want to make sure that that experience is a good experience. So that's a lot of the reason why we partner with New York Times and others, is so that there are no paywalls and no ads, and you can co-brand. And that's one of the other personalization things that we'll probably get to later.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, you know, it's a good transition kind of into the next bucket that you know, is in the report, in Awad's report that he outlined for us earlier. We've been talking about the advisor, and obviously that transitions into the type of content that, you know, they're delivering to clients. So, you know, as a next topic, as the next part of this, I wanted to ask, you know, starting with Will, I'll start with you. You know, just in your view, in general terms, what do you think makes good content? What do you think makes good and engaging content? Yeah, we can get to the others as well and get their opinions after.
Sure. You know, I think topicality is key in terms of tying content to the issues of the day, right? I mean, there's ongoing educational needs out there in the marketplace related to the direction of the markets, but also regulation. You have Reg BI, you know, in the US. Advisors are trying to communicate with their clients, but you know, I think it's ultimately, at the end of the day, trying to find content that is personalized, relevant to the needs and interests of the end user, and also finds the appropriate cadence or amount of touch that suits that client. So it's not just what, but it's also how often, Kareem.
Yeah.
I don't know if you agree, Kevin. Timing is
totally
important.
I completely agree. We're often at AdvisorStream, we're often asked, you know, how much is too much and how much is enough, right? And actually, again, the beautiful thing about living in a digital era is we have a lot of data. We know basically the answers to these questions today. We didn't only a few years ago, but today on average, and it's an average, but on average, investors receive 26 touch points a year. And there's a few different studies out there. Cerulli had a good one, but there's been a number of them. And those touch points include phone calls, emails, and meetings. Not immediately today, the meetings. You're going to lose that portion of the 26, obviously, during the COVID period. But they receive 26 touch points each year. And the interesting thing in the studies we've seen is they all age categories, all demographics, regardless of location, wealth, sex, gender, they all want more communication. At the same time, there's danger because the touch points are touch points, but what's included in a touch point is very critical. There's also very good information on if you're delivering irrelevant information that's not relevant to a client, that's actually detrimental. So, you know, the 26 touch points need to be more. And again, very easy to do today with content marketing platforms, but the content you deliver in those touch points needs to be relevant. And I think we've talked a lot about that. If it's not relevant, you actually stand a chance of losing the clients. We saw one report that showed over 20% of clients who have ended a professional relationship was due to irrelevant content and irrelevant communications, feeling that that professional didn't understand their unique situation. So I totally agree about the cadence is critical to figure that out. And also put the client in the driver's seat. With today's communication systems, you can allow the client to choose the frequency levels. So that's something that we always say is let your client tell you how much is too much.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that too. I think you know, one thing that has obviously, Kevin, you've mentioned, Will, Awad, you've mentioned as well today is the importance of third-party content, which, you know, obviously here at AdvisorStream we are this is our business, and you know what, the reason why we partner with the publishers that we partner with. But one question that definitely comes up a lot for us, and I think just in general when it comes to content marketing, Awad, you touched on it in your report, is, you know, can one person or firm create enough of their own in-house content and enough relevant in-house content or their own personal content to really engage with their clients? So Will, I'll pass it over to you first and get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the short answer is no, Kareem. I mean, you know, we as an industry have invested so much in automation, not just around the front office, but around the back office, around workflows, just for that reason, so that the advisor can spend his or her time on sales and service, focusing on the client. So content creation, you know, given the finite nature of time, takes away from that. Much more value in providing your perspective or your focus or your spin, if you will, on an existing piece of content, particularly if that content has been curated and provided to the client, you know, as Kevin was saying, you know, with the right cadence and with the understanding that this content is indeed of interest and relevant to that client. So that's where the advisor value add is, I believe.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Awad, did you find anything when you were going through writing your report, any research around, you know, how much an advisor is able to write their own content? Anything on that front that you want to add to?
So I think this is really challenging, especially nowadays when today's client is extremely informed. It's really difficult to compete with Twitter and your client's friends, right?
Sure.
So for a firm to take this challenge on in-house and to develop their own content, and, you know, timeliness is everything, especially for today's client who's continually being informed through notifications and alerts, and obviously, as I mentioned, his or her friends. Timeliness is what determines how valuable or relevant your content really is. And it's not just that, just the host of topics that you would need to cover in order to be relevant. It's nearly impossible to have a broad and diverse catalog that is in-house that can cater to all of that that thirst for knowledge in all these different areas in a timely fashion, right? You can't turn around that content as fast as the world's publishers or Twitter, right? So having access to an engine that aggregates that for you from different sources is key.
Not to mention the credibility of, you know, premier third-party content, right? I mean, I can tell you something, but if I see that in the paper of record or by a leading industry authority, that might, you know, have additional weight.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and yeah, Kevin, I was going to ask you that, you know, your thoughts on that, because obviously
I'm going to echo some of it, yeah. But I'm going to take it a little bit more from a tactics point of view. I think people today are incredibly informed, and you're not going to be able to compete with Twitter, as Awad said, and you're not going to have a lot of credibility if it's only you're out there putting, you know, you need in-depth content that's credible. Will was talking about credibility coming from third-party publishers. Awad was talking about the need for timely content and not trying to compete with a Twitter. And I agree with both of those things. The challenge for financial advisors today and for professionals today is that you don't know when someone's going to visit your inbound channels. You can control your outbound, your email, your newsletters, and your email campaigns. You get to control that, so you know when you're going to send that content. The challenge for advisors on other properties, inbound properties, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, website, blog, and even client portals, is you don't know when the client or the prospect is going to come and be searching for help, searching for an advisor. So you've got to have credible, fairly current content on these properties at all times. There's an interesting study that shows that once a piece of content's more than 3 days old, it's highly unlikely somebody will share it with someone else. And that's critical, that sharing for creating new digital referrals and capturing new leads. So you're kind of in a situation today, advisors are, where your head office probably produces content, you probably produce content, but your clients don't want you, sitting down and writing thought-provoking, insightful articles all week long. They want you managing their money and helping them get to their goals. I don't think there's any way an advisor truly or a head office can create enough to feed all those channels we're talking about, from social media channels, website and blog channels, and client portal channels. So I think a third party or other sources of content is absolutely required in modern digital marketing. Our view, and why we partner directly with publishers, is for what some of Will said, which is credibility, but also you got the best writers in the world working for you. You've got, and they're working for you ongoing. So, sorry here. So we really believe that you want to lean on, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Bloombergs, the Forbes, these really high quality publishers. But again, on that experience side, we believe you should license it so there's no paywalls and ads. The worst thing in the world is getting somewhere, seeing a piece of information that can help you address a problem right now. And especially if it was provided by a professional you pay and you can't access it, or you have to pull your credit card out to do so. So I think you need credibility, like Will said. You need current content, as Awad said. But we also believe a third part of that is you've got to provide a premium client experience. And you can do that by working with other world-class content creators.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think everybody's covered just about every point on that, which is awesome. And it kind of now brings us to the next bucket, if you will, on the report. We're talking about the communication channels, and Will, you touched on it in terms of cadence. Kevin, Awad, actually everybody touched on it. What the frequency, what is not only the frequency, but what are the channels themselves? Because obviously there's a number of channels. Twitter has been mentioned a number of times, social media channel. So actually, Kevin, to continue your thought, what do you think an advisor should be using as far as the types of channels to communicate?
Well, you're getting a guy who works at a digital marketing company. So my answer, but I believe it to be very true, is use every single channel you can. They're growing. I think 10 years ago seems like a lifetime ago. Actually, February seems like a lifetime ago. But if you look back 10 years, nobody was taking social media very serious as business channels. I think everybody today is and should be. In fact, 80% of the leads that we capture, and we're talking about tens of thousands of leads that we capture for advisors, 80% are in social media. So those social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, those are critical, and there will be new ones. I don't think we're going to be using TikTok anytime soon, but we might be. Let's keep our minds open to the new channels coming. But the last thing I'd say on channels is they all work perfectly together. And if you can get those channels working in concert, and I'll give you an example, you will be super successful with your digital marketing. You'll grow your business. We see it every day. But different channels do different things. So I mentioned 80% of our leads are captured through digital channels, social media channels. 100% of all of the leads we capture are then nurtured through email. Don't discount email. The email channel may be boring, but it's not going away. Human beings spend about hours and hours a day checking their email. So while we capture a lot of leads using credible, high quality current content from the New York Times and others, we capture those leads on social media. Every one of them we nurture and help the advisor convert them to clients through email, newsletters, and direct email campaigns. So I guess my answer is use all those channels. You have to have great content first, and then you can use that across channels. So make sure those channels work in concert, and you'll find yourself successful in digital marketing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm firmly on that on that thought as well. I guess, Will, kind of turning it back to you. When you're talking about a frequency, even just speaking from your own experience, how often do you feel an advisor should be communicating? Just from your own experience, from what you've seen in the industry.
Yeah, so, I think a sort of one observation, high level, is that, you want to communicate to a client's preferences, right, in terms of frequency and the nature of the content. But I think there is real power behind the regular touch point. And so, of course, you can get weekly updates from your advisor. You can get monthly, longer term. It really depends on what is trying to be communicated. I do think those regular touch points are key. And if you have a good handle on the back end of this business, namely the data and analytics, you can really see where you're getting traction. And I think that's critical.
Yeah, no, thank you, Will. I agree with all of that. From the New York Times perspective, from your perspective, having obviously been there as long as you've been, on what you feel makes good content, what makes good and engaging content, but also, what the New York Times does as using data to some extent to drive engaging content.
Basically, the most engaging content from a writer's perspective, and I used to be an editor for a long time at the News Services Group, is content that's written by talented journalists who are, when you think about it, they're storytellers. That's what their craft is, right? And they connect the dots, A to B to C, to explain something in its entirety. So when we were thinking about, that is the licensing group, working with different brands and seeing how New York Times content may work best, we felt there was a natural connection between the type of reporting that we do and the information that we provide to the world, and what a brand's goals might be in terms of informing their client base. We do know on the back end that a lot of the content that we write, due to the analytics that we use, is successful, does have very high engagement, does get high click-through rates. And so we know, and there's a large sector of our audience that is in the financial services industry. So we know that among our own readership at the New York Times, that particular C-suite of readers in the financial sector are drawn to the content that we put out there in the world. I knew in my heart that working with brands like AdvisorStream, the content that we'd be able to provide to them for use to a group of financial advisors around the globe would be useful. It's all about the storytelling. It's all about the amount of vetting that goes into the content and the stories. It's about the bylines that we have, that sometimes just also the names alone draw people in to read more about it. And it's about what I think the New York Times has stood for over 100 years, and that is informing the public about the world, helping them make informed decisions. And that, of course, includes in the area of finance. I have to say, Kareem and team, Kevin, everyone there, from what I've seen pass in terms of the stuff that AdvisorStream is putting out and what we are, with the types of content that we have a relationship with, has been some of the top picks. I think they're really, really strong. And I think it all comes down to the journalism. It just comes down to what our reputation is based on.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, that's a great answer, and certainly, certainly on our end at AdvisorStream, we feel the exact same way in terms of the quality of content that we curate from New York Times. So it's obviously a big part of our value proposition.
So Kareem, before we move on, can I just, Aidan made really good points there. I want to mention one thing that hasn't come up earlier. We talked about the high quality of the content that comes from the New York Times, and the click-through rates, similar to what Aidan was talking about, we see with investors are quite astonishing, and consistently amazingly high engagement rates. Typically, all of our advisors are close to 100% higher than the industry averages, and there's no guesswork here. It's because of the content that we're licensing. But I wanted to pick up on one point that Aidan said, and that is the people who read the New York Times, that demographic should be thought about. When you're using third-party content to support your own content, your head office's content, to communicate with clients and prospects, you want to make sure it's content that really is targeted to that kind of person, that education level, that income level, that sophistication level. And partnering with the New York Times certainly provides for us hugely credible content, targeted content written by the best writers in the world, but also it's a vast amount of content that we can choose from. And that is really, really critical, as we were talking about earlier. So Aidan, thanks for those points, but certainly agree with the engagement rates due to the storytelling the level of storytelling that comes out of the New York Times, which is astonishing.
Yeah.
The other thing I would add is that the way we see our content working, and I don't have context in terms of what you've spoken about earlier in this meeting, so my apologies, but we find that licensed content works best in the top of the sales funnel, or getting people drawn in early on. In certain ways, it's kind of like this might be a trite way to put it, but a bit of a volume game. In other words, you've got to put out as much as you can that's important, that is meaningful, that is informative, not just anything, but keep having touch points with potential customers out in the world. And content like licensed content, be it from the New York Times or even other reputable news sources that AdvisorStream works with, you want to be able to keep connecting with them. In some statistics I've read say that it takes 7 or 8 touch points for a brand to truly connect with a potential client or a client, because there's so much content and information in the world that the first couple of opportunities might get passed by. Whereas after the 7th or 8th time, they may really be drawn in. What that requires is a vast amount of content, unless you have such an infrastructure that you can write consistently, daily, or every other day. And of course, that's a large undertaking. But if, in the end, for me, it's both the power of the content and the volume of the content that you have to choose from.
Yeah, no, and you're right. Aidan, that's something we touched on earlier as well, is the breadth of content and certainly the volume that's required. We were talking earlier about whether one advisor or one firm can actually produce enough content to deliver and engage with their clients. And I think we all agree that that's not the case, and that's why third-party content from credible sources like the Times is so critical. And that that kind of just to be aware of time as well. I want to move on to the last part here about talking about obviously what's engaging and what is how different clients value different content. One thing that I think is really important is when you're, as an advisor, communicating with your clients, you should also be communicating with the entire family. And the reason is, of course, great wealth transfer. There's numbers being thrown around with 30 trillion, 40 trillion, 50 trillion dollars, whatever the number is, it's big. That's going to be transferred from baby boomers to their children through inheritance. So, Will, I'll ask you this first. How important do you see advisors communicating with their clients' children or even grandchildren in some cases as critical to their success, but also just in terms of engaging with different generations? How do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's critical, Kareem, given demographics and sort of the weight or the transfer of assets that's occurring even right now from the baby boomer generation to millennials and Generation Z. I think it's important to be cognizant that not only are the interests from a financial planning or investments perspective different. Obviously, boomers are looking to things like retirement income. Millennials and Gen Z are in accumulation phase. But these are, and we've looked at this in depth through our survey work, but these are generations with very different behavioral characteristics. Generation Z, millennials too, they don't stand on ceremony, right? They're not impressed by fancy offices. right? They want answers, they want insight, they want responsiveness. So all we're talking about here is very much spot on in terms of reaching this population, which after all is the future of our business.
Yeah.
Kevin, look like you're nodding to that. You must see that as well.
Yeah, I couldn't. I would repeat exactly what Will said if I hadn't heard it so well said. So thanks, Will. We take that very. It is the future of our business. Again, on channels, that's all I can add to Will's comments. Is yeah, they don't ceremony and pomp and stance is not something that the next generations care much about. They do care about education, and they care about the right information, and they care about getting what they want when they want it. And if you don't give it to them, you will not satisfy them.